Hello, everyone, and welcome to this podcast from the Light Review. A few days ago, we had from our good friends at Recolight their schedule for a lot of activity this year, all around circular economy, of course. And I thought, what would be better than to try and get hold of the big beasts behind all of this? But in lieu of the big beasts, what we've got is that we've got Nigel Harvey, CEO of Recolight. We've got Ray Molony, of course, who is kind of the editor and ringmaster of a lot of the live events, and Simon, who more and more people are coming out to see, who's running the circular economy workshop. So, hello, guys. How are we?
Good.
Good.
Good morning.
Okay, right.
Yeah, very good.
We don't want to take a long time on this because we're all very, very busy people. So I just thought I'd just look at each of you and I'd like to know where we are, where we think we are. Last year was a great year for Recolight, talking about the circular economy. Circular Lighting Live one-day conference was fantastic. And we're looking at more of the same this year, or are we looking at more of the same but necessarily different? If it's kind of like if you were a boy band, you'd be facing the other perils of the second album syndrome, because Circular Lighting Live was great. What does the second album look like? Ray, let's start with you on that one, because you'll be the guy fronting this.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think we learned from last year that is then driving the influence for what we'll be looking at this year in the context?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm very optimistic. I think the last few years have been remarkable. If you were talking to anybody in the lighting industry about reusing luminaires, about demountability, about modularity, if you were talking to any, you wouldn't have got any much purchase or and now there's been quite a shift in mindset. Absolutely, it's not always translated into actuality, but there has been a big change, and people are talking about these things, taking these things seriously. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. Some of these things take a long time to come to fruition. Developing products, can be a long time, as you know, but it is remarkable how companies are taking this serious. There's been a real change as I say, in the mood music, and people are seriously talking about tackling Cat A problem now. Companies that are really, Fargo came out with a product the other day. They're reusing TV sets for the reflector. It's 70% from renewable sources. It's got wood components. I mean, these are products would have been extremely remarkable a few years ago, and now they're not becoming standard, but they're definitely on their way. And I think that's quite remarkable. And I think a lot of that has been the fact that we're talking about this and we're putting the conversation. There's also sustainability is obviously on the agenda, but the lighting industry has moved enormously in the last few years, and the future is bright. What we need is some of the big players to look seriously at reconditioning and moving away from just ticking the climate neutral box. Mm-hmm. And we also need to challenge our clients as well as to why does it have to be that way? Why do you need to light this? Have you thought about reuse? Why are we skipping all these luminaires? Why are we refurbishing? Particularly hospitality, retail, and I think that is actually starting to happen. Some of the leading practices are actually challenging their clients and saying, why are we doing it this way? If you're really sustainable, we need to be looking at X. So I'm very optimistic.
Okay, Ray, that's an excellent segue into the work that Simon's doing, of course, with the Regen initiative. So Simon, on the one hand, you've got circular economy workshops. This is how you make a circular economy fixture. On the other hand, here's the remanufacture side of things, and I'm sure in your inbox, the same as in my inbox, we've got the draft of BS 887, and I'm sure you've read yours as well as I've read mine.
Of course, John.
Thank you. Okay, we don't need to go into that one then. So,
moving swiftly on. Yeah, I think it's really exciting to see the kind of uptake in a language change and a mindset change with regards to all things circular, but particularly in the principle of kind of remanufacturing. And I think there was a fire lit under, a pyre with Circular Lighting Live. It really sort of touched quite heavily on remanufacturing. It's very clear that there's a lot of OEMs embracing their own policies about how they deal with their own backyard with regards to remanufacturing, and where the regen has kind of just exploded at the moment is stepping back and looking at dealing with clients that have multiple OEMs on one big project and managing the individual requirements to remanufacture products at project level, which is something that Regen does, but others do, egg lighting and others do as well.
Yeah. Are we getting the picture that there's, because it's one of those things I've always assumed and didn't know, that these sort of things have already been going on, but it never had a name. It was just a case of we were upgraded.
Absolutely. I mean, my first job in lighting in the early 90s was, Concord Lighting doing specials, right? Yeah. And what that really meant was every time we needed a deviation from a standard product in the catalog, it kind of was channeled through that department. And whether that was putting analog or digital drivers onto a standard product or emergency conversions back then, before they became mainstream. So this principle of remanufacture is age old, right? But it just hasn't coalesced under a banner that that BS 8887 will provide it, which is this kind of standard manner of going about doing this kind of work, so that specifiers and end users can then have a high degree of comfort that it's being that this reuse or this remanufacture is being conducted with kind of equal amount of regulatory vigor.
Okay. Nigel, I'll come to you in a second. I just want to ask one more of both Ray and Simon. Whenever we get a movement underway, the energy has to come from a certain place. And Nigel has represented circular economy energy as if you like the kicking off point. At some point, you realise that the thing has tipped a little bit. And it's the difference between let's run a one-day conference and let's see if we can fill our exhibition space with relevant manufacturers, where the donkey work has to be done by the organisers to fill the room. And likewise with the workshop, Simon, where you almost invite people to the workshop, to the point when they come to you and say, we want to be part of this. We want to be one of the manufacturers at Circular Lighting Life 23. We want to come to your workshop. Where's the nearest workshop? Can you come to us? Have we seen that shift, do you think? Ray and Simon, either which way.
Yeah, I think we have. I think what it is we're seeing there's passionate individuals right across the supply chain. So in manufacturers, in end users, architects, in practices, and a lot of them are passionate about this area. They get the big picture and they're helping to drive it in individual organizations. And I think that's definitely making a difference. Okay. You're right too. Giving something a label is important. Language is important, but more important than that, what really lights the fuel under it is a standard or a guideline. And we were talking earlier about how you can actually drive innovation by specifying a standard. And I think you look at the take up of TM66, TM65, 8887, and the work you're doing on that is fantastic. That is actually helping to drive this, and it's all part of the engine. And with passionate people in those organizations and guidelines and labeling things, and this is a thing now. Remanufacturing is a new ecosystem that we did. That all helps to drive it. So that contributes to my optimism.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think from a workshop perspective, I know you've all sat in at various points on the program from last year, and it was incredibly encouraging, the level of engagement that came through those. I didn't stand for a day and talk at people. It became a real collaborative discussion about how we deal with some of the specific challenges we have. And I think it was 6 or 7 or 8 maybe workshops that delivered last year, and the content in each workshop changed continually, you know, and it spoke to how fast paced the kind of industry is working to try and, you know, encapsulate and deliver on, you know, circular principles. You know, it's fascinating, and you know, we're working on the next workshop program, and it will drive into some more specifics, particularly around kind of circularity and carbon calculations.
Now that suggests that if you're able to drill down into more specificity, I think is a word. Does that mean there's things that are now already understood that you don't have to talk about because it's assumed? Or if you've still got people who are coming in and they are innocents?
Yeah, there's a broad church still, right? It goes from tell me about this newfangled circularity stuff to, you know, I think we've got our head around it, but need, you know, and really seeking some advice around specific issues.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a case, I think, from an industry perspective that the cart will lead the horse for some time in terms of sort of regulatory. I mean, we're seeing it with the TM66 in particular, but also 8887 to a degree, in the fact that people want to embrace this and are going to actively define the way that they're going to do it, and then, you know, mold that to standards as they formally get produced and put onto market.
Okay, thanks for that. Nigel, thank you for your patience. Just looking at it strategically, or a little more strategically, because you're sitting there in Recolight, you're probably the only person who gets lots and lots of numbers to look at on a regular basis. Is it too early to know whether we're getting the sea change that we're all hoping for, or is it just it's a case of it's somewhere in the breeze, but we're not actually seeing the numbers?
I think it's a little too early. I mean, I concur absolutely with what Simon and Ray have already said, in that we've had a real sea change, and companies even 2, 3, 4 years ago that you wouldn't have thought for a moment would be concerned about remanufacture of products, about circularity, are actually, you know, coming around and talking about making things happen. In part, I think it's because people are joining the dots. They're joining the dots to what's happening out there in the real world. You know, the hottest ever recorded temperature in the UK last year, worst drought in Europe for 500 years. This January was the hottest in 8 different European countries, and they're converting that into what I have to do in my business to play my part, to really make a difference. And there's a lot of things that we can all do, but one of them is fundamentally trying to make products that last longer, stay in service for longer, and keep in service for longer when they need upgrading or repairing. I mean, at some levels, I'm impatient, and I've always been impatient, as the team at Recolight will tell you. And so, yes, we're not yet, I would say, seeing the numbers, but the attitude has changed. And once you've got attitude change, then it's much more likely that real change will follow.
Okay, Ray mentioned 2 things. One, the importance of giving something a name, because once you give something a name, you can wear it as a badge, and hopefully it means something. And the other one is the outreach work that we're doing very well within our, dare I say, within our bubble, within our sector, to be polite about it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying, we're just going to do good stuff. The rest of you do what you do, but we're just going to do good stuff. But from a societal, from a planetary, from an international, from a global point of view, that's not good enough either. And it's like, to what extent, Nigel, are we able to take the thing that now has a name and offer it out and say, do you want a piece of this? Now, at the back, in my mind, I'm thinking we've got ESG strategies. We're seeing ESG directors coming through development companies, through architectural companies, even, you know, the big global lighting manufacturers of now making ESG statements where they used to make social responsibility statements. How To what extent do you think you might have the bandwidth to be able to promote that bigger picture?
I mean, I think what we in Recolight are just one tiny little organisation in one sector of the industry.
You've got to ask, Nigel.
And I think what we're fundamentally trying to do is to help and to work with all our different friends and colleagues in the sector to collectively try to move forward. And what was thrilling, although worrying at another level, was when DEFRA said at Circular Lighting Live last year that actually the lighting industry is ahead of the game, and that's great at one level to think actually we're really starting collectively to make a difference, but at the same time, we probably should be further on anyway, which is seriously worrying for those who are perhaps further behind us.
Yes, and that is the thing that it grows your shoulders, doesn't it? Because if we are so far out front, everyone is going to say, we don't understand how to do this. They say, well, in that case, look at the lighting industry, because they have got a pattern. They have actually got a template. They've got a standard. So the things that we do, we need to be sure that we're as rock solid as we can be. And we will make mistakes and we will miss things.
Indeed, and that's one of the reasons why we're running another shorter, more focused conference just on the remanufacture of fittings in April, because we recognise that was one of the big takeouts from Circular Lighting Live, was that companies, manufacturers particularly, wanted to find out more about how to make this happen. And so we're doing that in April, getting a range of companies that are already active in this sector to talk through the challenges, the opportunities, and how to make it work. And that excites me, because we're already getting bookings for that, and people are really interested in finding out more.
That's great. Guys,
it's an interesting observation, though, around lighting being seen to be at the forefront, because I still think there's a lot of OEMs that are not fully engaging in the process, because there's still, on the face of it, there's a lot of different avenues you can take, and I'm talking particularly around things like life cycle analysis and embodied carbon and operational carbon evaluations, and there still seems to be a lot of discussion saying, well, actually, what do I do? What do I adopt? How do I go about getting these? How do I go about getting these numbers? And I think a reasonably genuine concern is, well, actually, if I back a particular horse, cradle to cradle, for instance, if I back that, but then at UK and at European level, we adopt, a different principle. PEP Eco Passport, is the one that Lighting Europe seem to be aligning to. Do I lose out, right? Have I invested a lot of money, and I've then got to go and reinvest that to go about getting the industry standard model together. So there's still a long way to go to kind of smooth the pathway and harmonize the data that gets produced.
And an awful lot of this is actually what people expect to read. That it's very easy to write a specification and say, we need this information from you, without any explanation.
Yeah.
But if you do that, then we end up with this potential logjam of too many systems, too many standards, too many ways of reviewing things. It all comes down to the same thing at the end of the day. Yeah. But the analysis has to be done by the analyzers, and no one can really expect the manufacturing industry to cover all of those bases, when actually what's needed is just a very simple, straightforward. I think. Are you going to be covering any of that in webinars, right?
Yeah, well, we've got a program of webinars this year touching on everything from going net zero, looking at products, and looking at diving into that. And of course, we'll have a very comprehensive program at Circular Lighting Live. I personally, I wouldn't be too self-congratulatory in our industry. I know we're starting to change the conversation and things are happening, But let's not kid ourselves. This is still a very, very linear business. We take stuff, we push it through, we push it out the other end in boxes, and that's what we do. And in some ways, you could argue we've actually gone backwards with LEDs. Where you have embedded modules that can't be removed and are difficult to demount, recycle, etc. And I know there's a regulatory landscape coming along that will seek to change that, but you could argue that the days when you could change lamps was more environmentally friendly in some ways, and in terms of its carbon impact. So we've got a bit to go, and I think there's a lot happening in other industries. I think in the construction sector, the architecture, sustainability is really high up the agenda, and we could get to the stage where developers, building owners, architects are challenging us, and we have to have answers. So I think we need to be in a position where we can say, yes, we can manage the lighting throughout the life of a building. We can upgrade it, manage it, change it, improve it, and take ownership of those luminaires throughout their whole life. And that is a big mindset change, and there's also quite challenging as to the logistics of how we do that. But we need to think differently and think of existing buildings as a resource, as our warehouse, basically. That these everything in a new building is something that will get reused in the future. It's not like that's the end point, and I think that mindset will change, will happen, and we need to be, as I say, ready for that, and have all our standards and procedures and all in place. And I know that Nigel's doing a lot of work on this, and it is quite challenging, and there are some issues there, but I think not beyond the wit of man.
Yeah, not beyond the wit of man. On that point, I'm going to say thanks for your time, because we've run on a little bit more than I was expecting to. I was thinking we were going to have sort of three very sort of succinct statements, but this could run into a conversation that could go on for hours. So let's not do that. Let's save some of that for the next time. So Ray, thank you. Simon, thank you. Nigel, of course, thank you. And all of you listening, all of you, thank you for your time too. And we'll see you again next time